The late afternoon sun cast long, yellowed streaks across the glass windows of the Los Angeles Arts Academy as I, Chloe, a piano teacher, ran my fingers over the keys, lost in the familiar melody of Moonlight Sonata. I was waiting for my last student of the day. My life since graduating from the Juilliard School had been calm, revolving around musical scores, black and white keys, and my parents' modest house in a quiet, established neighborhood out in Orange County. My parents, both retired civil servants, were traditional and disciplined, always teaching me to appreciate what I had and live contentedly. Most of my evening students were working adults, seeking solace in music from the daily grind of life. Among them, Mrs. Eleanor Finch was a striking exception. Eleanor first appeared at the Academy one drizzly afternoon, stepping out of a luxurious sedan. Her chauffeur meticulously shielded her with an umbrella all the way to the door. My first impression of her was one of utmost dignity and sophistication. She was about my mother's age, but her skin was immaculately cared for, her features delicate, and her figure remarkably trim. She always wore glamorous, custom-tailored silk ensembles. On her arm hung a designer handbag, one I knew could easily cost several years of my teaching salary. The subtle, captivating scent of her perfume, never overpowering, always announced her arrival from afar. Despite her outward luxury, Eleanor revealed a nervous shyness when seated at the piano. She confided in me that her impoverished childhood had deprived her of the opportunity to learn music. Now, in her twilight years, with all material comforts at hand, she yearned for soothing melodies to fill her soul's void. I patiently held her hands, guiding her through the most basic notes, showing her how to keep her fingers soft and fluid. Perhaps it was this dedication that made Eleanor particularly fond of me. After each lesson, when other students rushed home to their families, she often lingered, pleading with me to play a complete piece for her. In the quiet solitude of the practice room, she would sit with her eyes closed, her hands gently swaying to the music. When the last note faded, I often noticed a shimmer of tears in her eyes. She began to tell me about her life, her voice mournful and even-toned. "You see me looking all radiant, dear, and everyone says I'm blessed. But in my heart, I'm so lonely," she would lament. "My husband passed away early, and I built an empire with my own hands to ensure my son got the best education. Now he's studying in London. This sprawling mansion, it's just me and the staff. Sometimes, when I'm sick in the night, I yearn for a kind word from family, but there's no one." Her sincere, unadorned confessions touched my sensitive heart. I began to feel sympathy for her, a genuine camaraderie between women. Eleanor made no secret of her affection for me. She frequently brought lavish gifts to class, sometimes a box of the finest artisan chocolates for my parents, other times a basket of fresh imported fruits. At first, I adamantly declined, embarrassed, and feeling the gifts were too grand for a teacher-student relationship, but she'd grasp my hand, her eyes pleading. "I see you as the daughter I never had. You're so sweet and gentle. It would break my heart if you refused." I might even stop my lessons. Her charm and sincerity made it impossible for me to refuse. Gradually, the distance between the wealthy student and the humble piano teacher dissolved. We became close, calling each other dear and sweetheart. She often inquired about my family, my work, and my future plans. A powerful woman who genuinely listened to a young girl's confidences. This made me completely drop my guard, trusting her with all my naive heart. I was utterly unaware that behind that flawless facade and those honeyed words, a cunning net was silently being cast, waiting for me to step in. My relationship with Eleanor grew increasingly intimate. One weekend evening, she called, inviting me for tea at a charming, old-world-style cafe in West Hollywood. She said someone very special wanted to meet me. I carefully chose a modest dress, applied light makeup, and took a taxi to the meeting point. As I entered the space, fragrant with incense and filled with soft jazz, Eleanor was already seated in a secluded corner, beaming and waving me over. Beside her sat a tall, young man in a perfectly pressed sky-blue shirt and well-tailored trousers. "Chloe, darling, you're here. Come, sit next to me." Eleanor eagerly pulled out a chair for me, then turned with a radiant smile to the young man. "Ethan, this is Chloe, my precious son. He just finished his master's in business administration in England and flew back a few days ago. I've told him so much about you, and he insisted on meeting my wonderful teacher." Ethan stood up, smiling politely. His smile was bright, his gaze direct yet not presumptuous. "Hello, Chloe. My mother talks about you constantly. She says you've brought so much joy and zest back into her life. On behalf of my family, thank you." Ethan's voice was deep, calm, and incredibly pleasant. That evening's tea unfolded in an unusually warm atmosphere. Unlike most wealthy young men who boasted about cars, designer goods, or lavish trips, Ethan proved to be a remarkably profound individual. He spoke of his time in misty London, the challenges of independence abroad, and his passion for European art and architecture. His topics were refined, perfectly aligning with my artistic sensibilities. Beyond his eloquent speech, Ethan earned absolute admiration for his meticulous thoughtfulness. He proactively ordered my favorite chamomile honey tea without me even mentioning it, simply because he'd noticed me clearing my throat when cold drafts came in. He carefully poured tea, offered napkins, pulled out chairs, and opened car doors. Every gesture was natural and chivalrous, like a true gentleman educated in a prestigious environment. After that meeting, Ethan proactively asked for my number and texted me daily. His messages weren't intrusive or overwhelming, but perfectly timed. A cheerful good morning, a wordless melody he'd stumbled upon that reminded him of me, a reminder to bring a jacket when the LA weather turned chilly unexpectedly. His measured, attentive care seeped subtly into my heart like gentle raindrops. We began to go on private dates. Ethan often picked me up after my late lessons. His luxurious car glided through the city's glittering streets, taking me to quiet restaurants, to classical concerts at the Walt Disney Concert Hall, or simply for a breezy walk along the Santa Monica Pier. With him, I felt peaceful and protected. He always listened to my joys and sorrows, offering sharp advice that was both rational and empathetic. Less than 6 months into our acquaintance, I was completely captivated by this mature, talented, and perfectly understanding man. Love blossomed naturally when Ethan took my hand under the shade of ancient trees, declared his love, and expressed his desire to care for me for the rest of my life. I nodded, without a moment's hesitation. A bright, radiant future seemed to open before me, though I was utterly unaware that behind that flawless perfection lay an abyss of unimaginable depth. My relationship with Ethan flourished beautifully, actively nurtured by Eleanor. One day, she called me, her voice bubbling with excitement, to say that the family was hosting a small celebration that weekend to mark Ethan officially taking over the family business. She wanted me to join as a family member, emphasizing that her driver would pick me up from my home. True to her word, a sleek black car pulled up to my modest house at the appointed time. The car glided smoothly over bridges, taking me into one of the city's most exclusive coastal communities. The area was verdant with shady trees, its meticulously planned roads quiet and secluded, completely isolated from the city's hustle and bustle. The car stopped before a grand, 2-story mansion right on the water. Decorative wrought iron gates swung open. I stepped in, mesmerized by the opulence. The sprawling garden was perfectly manicured, featuring a crystal-clear koi pond where brightly colored fish swam gracefully. The mansion's architecture exuded a European neoclassical style, with elegant cream-colored walls and large windows that welcomed natural light. Eleanor, despite wearing simple silk loungewear, still radiated an air of grace as she greeted me at the door. She took my hand and led me into the living room. Inside, the furniture was entirely crafted from exquisite, intricately carved hardwoods. Sparkling crystal chandeliers cascaded from the soaring ceilings. The luxurious leather sofa sets radiated an aura of wealth and power. Everything gleamed, imbued with the scent of money and authority. Dinner was served in a vast dining room, featuring expensive dishes like lobster, abalone, and shark fin soup, prepared by the family's private chef. Throughout the meal, Eleanor seemed incredibly busy. Her phone constantly rang. She apologized, stepping out onto the balcony to take calls, but intentionally kept her voice loud enough for me to hear the weighty words. Seal the deal on that prime downtown property for $100 million for me. Get the paperwork done quickly this week. Or tell customs to release that imported shipment immediately. A day late and the client will fine us millions. I sat in quiet awe, feeling a sudden surge of self-consciousness about my humble background. Ethan seemed to notice my discomfort. He gently placed a piece of fish on my plate, smiling kindly. Don't mind Mom, sweetheart. She's always been a workaholic, juggling one project after another. I've told her to take it easy and let me handle things, but she insists. Just enjoy your meal. Consider this your home. Then, Ethan gently chided his mother as she hung up the phone. Mom, Chloe's here to visit. Can't you leave work alone for just one evening? Talking about millions like this will scare Chloe away. Eleanor chuckled warmly, patting my arm. Old habits, darling, please forgive me. I've worked hard my whole life just to provide for Ethan. Now that he has you, I can finally entrust this empire to the two of you and retire. perhaps dedicate my time to charity work and travel. Her words softened my heart. Her sincere, unpretentious demeanor and Ethan's protective closeness dispelled my anxieties about our wealth disparity. I naively believed that no matter how rich they were, they valued genuine affection above social status. I had been perfectly fooled by a meticulously staged play with expensive props and brilliant actors. Just a few months after we officially started dating, Eleanor and Ethan abruptly brought up marriage. She claimed a family astrologer had predicted this year was exceptionally auspicious for us. If we missed it, we'd have to wait 3 more years, and she was so eager for grandchildren. The groom's family's enthusiasm somewhat surprised my parents, but out of love for their daughter, seeing that I had found a decent man, they agreed to a formal meeting between the two families. The engagement ceremony took place one beautiful Sunday morning at my family's small but neat bungalow. Early that day, my father personally brewed the finest coffee. My mother arranged an exquisite bouquet of red roses, placing it honorably on the coffee table. Our entire family waited nervously for the arrival of my future in-laws. Precisely on schedule, the groom's party arrived. Stepping out of 3 luxury cars were Eleanor, Ethan, and several well-dressed older relatives. They carried beautifully arranged gift baskets filled with expensive imported wines, gourmet coffees, and fresh exotic fruits. Their arrival drew the gaze of the entire street. Eleanor entered my home with a confident, stately air. She greeted my parents with impeccable politeness and respect. After initial pleasantries, Eleanor calmly spoke. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller, I'm a businesswoman, direct and straightforward. My son, Ethan, has transformed since he met Chloe. He's more focused, responsible, and dedicated to his work. I see Chloe, so gentle and well-raised by you both. I couldn't be happier." She paused, took a sip of tea, then continued, her voice full of earnestness. "My family may have some financial means, but I never prioritize social status. All I ask for is a kind daughter-in-law who will love her husband and nurture our family's happiness. Chloe is truly a precious gem that our family is fortunate to have found. Today, we humbly ask for your permission for our children to officially be together and to discuss wedding plans, so they may soon settle down." My parents were humble, down-to-earth people. Initially, they were a little intimidated by the groom's family's overt display of wealth. Disparities in background often brought challenges to a marriage, a concern every parent naturally holds. However, swayed by Eleanor's logical words, her respectful demeanor, and Ethan's dignified appearance, my parents' hesitation completely dissolved. My mother pondered for a moment, then nodded, her voice calm. "Since you've spoken so kindly, Mrs. Finch, our family accepts your sincerity. We only have one daughter. Our greatest asset is our family values and upbringing. We only hope that our children will love and cherish each other, showing respect to elders and kindness to all. If your family doesn't look down on our humble circumstances, then we are happy to bless their union." Hearing my father agree, Eleanor beamed. She grasped my mother's hand, smiling broadly. "Mrs. Miller, rest assured, I will cherish Chloe as my own daughter. For the upcoming wedding, our family will handle all arrangements, hosting the grandest celebration in the state, so Chloe will want for nothing." The engagement ceremony concluded with harmonious laughter and chatter from both families. My parents saw off their guests, overjoyed that their daughter had found such a peaceful and stable haven. I watched the cars disappear, my heart overflowing with happiness, silently thanking fate for blessing me with such a thoughtful mother-in-law and a perfect fiancé. From the day the engagement went smoothly, Eleanor immediately plunged into wedding preparations with incredible speed and boundless generosity. She reasoned that as the future eldest daughter-in-law, I represented the family's image, so everything, down to the smallest detail, had to be impeccable. She dismissed all my suggestions for modest wedding services, personally arranging a shopping schedule for me. On weekends, instead of teaching extra lessons, I was chauffeured to the city's most exclusive shopping districts like Rodeo Drive or high-end department stores like Saks Fifth Avenue. Eleanor led me through luxury brand boutiques, her eyes betraying no concern for price tags. Our first stop was an exclusive jewelry store. Eleanor grandly requested to see the largest, most flawless diamond engagement rings. I was dazzled by the sparkling diamonds reflecting the lights, my hand trembling as the sales associate placed a ring on my finger. The ring was worth $500,000, equivalent to a small house in the suburbs. "This one suits you, darling. This diamond is one of a kind, perfectly cut. A daughter-in-law of this family must wear only the best." Eleanor smiled contentedly, then swiped her credit card without a moment's hesitation. Next, she pulled me into a Chanel boutique. Though I tried to object, saying I wasn't used to such expensive items and that they didn't quite fit my personality, she ignored me. She personally selected a limited edition alligator skin handbag worth tens of thousands of dollars, draped it over my shoulder, and admired it with immense pride. Not just handbags, she bought me a whole wardrobe of designer dresses and imported luxury cosmetics. Returning home after a day of shopping, laden with bags and boxes from high-end brands, I felt more overwhelmed and anxious than delighted. The enormous wealth lavished upon me made me feel like a doll in a display case, heavy and alienated from myself. That evening, when Ethan picked me up for dinner, I brought up the subject with him. I asked him to persuade his mother to stop the shopping spree, as these gifts were too extravagant. I feared I wasn't worthy of such generosity and that my family would be seen as exploiting his. Ethan pulled over to a quiet street corner, turned off the engine, and looked at me with immense tenderness. He took my hand, enveloping my small hands in his warm palms. "My silly girl, don't overthink things. My mother has worked hard in the business world her entire life, surrounded by people who are constantly calculating and exploiting. Now that she's older, all she craves is a real family, a kind daughter, whom she can openly love and spoil. Buying these things isn't about showing off, it's her way of expressing her affection. If you refuse these gifts, Mom will think you're looking down on our family, or that you don't truly consider her family. That would hurt her deeply. Sometimes, as children, we accept things not because we crave material possessions, but to make our elders happy. Just comfortably accept her love, darling. I'm here, no one will dare to criticize your family." Ethan's exceptionally sweet, reasoned, and filial explanation completely dismantled my last vestiges of resistance. I submissively nodded, burying my face in his chest, chastising myself for overthinking and for misjudging my future mother-in-law's kindness. I closed my eyes, immersed in the sweet sensation of a princess awakened in a brilliant castle, abandoning my life to the glittering light of money and sugar-coated lies, utterly unaware that the most terrifying nightmare of my life was about to begin. The velvet curtain of the deceptive stage had been raised, and I was the most docile prey, smiling as I walked into the spotlight. Time flew by, and soon it was almost time for the final preparations for my new home with Ethan. According to the plan, after the wedding, we would move in with Eleanor at the waterfront mansion in the exclusive coastal community. Eleanor's reasoning was that the house was large, and she was alone, so she wanted us to live there to add joy to the home. My parents also agreed with this decision, thinking that, with a thoughtful mother-in-law like Eleanor, I would ease into married life more comfortably. One midweek morning, the Los Angeles sky was clear and bright. Eleanor had her driver pick me up at the Arts Academy to go furniture shopping. She said our bridal suite needed to be completely refurnished, from the bed and wardrobe to the vanity and even the curtains. The car smoothly delivered us to an upscale imported furniture showroom, located on a busy main street. Stepping through the clear glass doors, I was immediately overwhelmed by the vast and incredibly luxurious space inside. The scent of new wood, premium leather, blended with the subtle fragrance of lemongrass essential oil, creating a very pleasant atmosphere. Soft yellow lights illuminated royal-style sofas, intricately carved beds gilded with real gold. Classical music gently flowed from some hidden corner, making the space even more elegant. Eleanor glided through the showrooms with her arm looped through mine, her demeanor confident and authoritative. She constantly pointed and instructed the sales associates to show her the newest, most expensive collections. She stopped before a substantial bed made of solid teak wood, upholstered in imported Italian bull leather. When the associate quoted the price for the bedroom set at nearly $250,000, I gasped and quickly tugged Eleanor's sleeve. I softly suggested choosing simpler designs, both to save money and to avoid waste. After all, comfort was the essence of furniture. But Eleanor brushed me off. She laughed loudly, her clear voice resonating through the hushed showroom. She declared bluntly that money was not an issue for her family, that a wedding was a once-in-a-lifetime event, and she had to ensure her daughter-in-law received nothing but the best. She even turned to the associate, telling him to process the order for the most expensive set. She would pay for everything at once. Her unhesitating extravagance impressed the staff in the store, who nodded and curtsied deferentially. While Eleanor was engrossed in admiring a meticulously inlaid mother-of-pearl vanity, her phone suddenly rang from her handbag. She frowned, checked the screen, then turned to pat my arm. She said her partners from the import-export company were calling with an urgent situation regarding a shipment. She needed to step out to the lobby to find a quiet place to handle it. She told me to take my time, note down anything I liked, and she would be right back after her call. Watching her figure disappear behind the glass doors, I let out a sigh of relief. The oppressiveness of the luxurious items and the astronomical figures made a girl from a humble background like me feel incredibly flustered. I strolled leisurely along the plush carpeted aisle, reaching out to touch the smooth surface of a wooden cabinet, a mix of happiness and anticipation blossoming in my heart. In just a short while, I would officially become Ethan's wife, the mistress of such a lavish home. Thinking of my parents' kind smiles back home, and Ethan's thoughtfulness, I unconsciously smiled to myself. I silently gave thanks to fate for such a wonderful connection, a future paved with roses that I had never even dared to dream of. I was completely immersed in that beautiful dream, unaware that a terrifying storm was about to crash down upon me in the very next moment. I was contemplating a clear crystal bedside lamp when a woman in her 50s approached. She wore an elegant moss green dress, her hair neatly styled in a bun at the back of her head, her face radiating kindness yet also extreme shrewdness. I recognized her as Mrs. Davis, the owner of this furniture showroom, who had been observing us from the cashier's counter. Mrs. Davis carried a small wooden tray with 2 glasses of chilled orange juice. She smiled warmly, inviting me to sit on a nearby sofa and rest. She said I must be tired from walking around and offered the juice to refresh me. Her friendly hospitality made me feel very comfortable. I politely took a glass, smiling my thanks. We began to chat. Mrs. Davis asked about my work and my upcoming wedding. She complimented my gentle, kind beauty, adding that as a piano teacher, I surely possessed a sweet disposition. I modestly deflected her compliments, feeling a strange warmth in my heart. Mrs. Davis exuded a down-to-earth kindness, much like my aunts back in our hometown. Our conversation was flowing pleasantly when Mrs. Davis suddenly lowered her voice. She glanced around the showroom as if to ensure no one was near us. Her face abruptly tensed, the smile vanishing, replaced by a strangely serious expression. She leaned towards me, her eyes fixed on mine, and asked in a whisper barely audible to us both. "Is your fiancé's family from that exclusive community?" Surprised by the abrupt question, I didn't think much of it. I honestly nodded, a confirming smile on my face. I was even about to brag about Ethan's family's spectacular waterfront mansion, but before I could speak, I saw Mrs. Davis's expression change dramatically. Her usually rosy complexion turned pale, as if she had just seen a ghost. Her hands, resting on her lap, trembled slightly. Before I could react, Mrs. Davis abruptly stood up. She grabbed my wrist tightly, her grip so strong it stung a little. She pulled me to my feet, her voice choked with urgency and panic. She told me to follow her into the back office immediately, saying there was something extremely important she needed to tell me right away. I was utterly bewildered, unable to comprehend what was happening. Her fear infected me, making my heart beat faster than usual. I submissively allowed her to pull me along, my steps stumbling as we passed through the display area, deeper into the store. We reached a small room hidden at the end of a hallway, marked staff break room. As soon as we entered, Mrs. Davis slammed the doors shut and locked the deadbolt. The room was quite soundproof. All the street noise and the gentle music from the showroom were completely shut out. The space suddenly became eerily silent. Mrs. Davis released my hand, stepped back, and let out a long, weary sigh. She looked at me with eyes full of pity and sorrow, as if seeing a small bird about to fly into a burning trap. I stood frozen in place, clutching the hem of my dress. A premonition told me that the words about to come from this woman's mouth would forever change my life. In the confined space of the staff break room, the smell of instant coffee and office papers wafted into my nose, making me even more alert. Mrs. Davis pulled out a plastic chair, pressing on my shoulder to make me sit. She took a bottle of water from the table, poured a glass, and urged me to drink a mouthful to calm down. Seeing my hands still trembling, she sat down on the chair opposite me, taking my cold hands in hers. She spoke in a deep, hushed voice, each word striking my chest like a hammer blow. She advised me never to marry the man named Ethan, to find every way to break off the engagement immediately before things went too far. Her advice was like a splash of ice water to my face, extinguishing all the hope and radiant joy I had cherished just moments before. I stammered, intending to ask why, but my throat tightened, unable to utter a sound. Mrs. Davis began to recount a story that she would likely never forget. About 3 months prior, she had personally overseen the delivery of a set of outdoor furniture to that very waterfront mansion in the exclusive coastal community. That mansion, which Eleanor claimed as her home. It was a scorching day, and her staff had carried the items all the way to the backyard. Mrs. Davis had asked to use the ground floor restroom to wash her face. Passing by a partially ajar office door, she had inadvertently overheard Eleanor shouting into the phone, Eleanor's tone then was not at all refined or polite, as her exterior suggested. It was the voice of a debtor desperately trying to appease ruthless loan sharks. Mrs. Davis pressed herself against the door, listening intently to the chilling phone call. Eleanor was urgently pleading with the other end of the line for a few more months to pay. She swore she was luring a lucrative target. That target was a piano teacher, from a well-respected family. Her parents had good retirement savings, a decent house, and land in a well-established neighborhood. Eleanor laid out a meticulously detailed plan. The opulent mansion in the exclusive community was actually a short-term rental, merely for show. The luxurious, polished cars were all rented by the day from various garages. Even all the money for designer shopping, diamond rings, and the impressive engagement gifts were loans from ruthless loan sharks. The poisonous scheme of Eleanor and Ethan was to use this glamorous facade to trick me into signing a marriage certificate. After the wedding, they would use every means to pressure me into getting pregnant as soon as possible. The innocent child in my womb would become a hostage, a tool to control and threaten me. They calculated that my kind parents, upon seeing their own daughter and grandchild trapped in such a predicament, would bite the bullet and sell their house. Drain their retirement savings to pay off their debts to these scammers. Eleanor had even hurled vulgar insults, calling my family stupid, easy targets, a stark contrast to the image of an affluent lady who frequented charity events. Hearing this, my world completely collapsed. Nausea surged to my throat. My ears rang, everything around me spun. The image of Ethan's affectionate smile, Eleanor's honeyed words, now transformed into venom-tipped fangs piercing my heart. I was in agony, choked with rage and utterly stunned. I realized I was just a puppet, manipulated by them on a stage of greed and cruelty. Mrs. Davis embraced me, trying to comfort me. Tears of pity streamed down the cheeks of this stranger, who was now my greatest benefactor, desperately trying to pull me from the deadly quicksand. After hearing the entire horrific truth from Mrs. Davis, it took me a long time to regain my breath. I was drenched in a cold sweat, my limbs weak, yet my mind felt strangely calm and lucid. I told myself not to cry, not to break down now. At all costs, I had to verify everything myself and protect my family from the clutches of these monsters in human skin. I splashed cold water on my face, took a deep breath, forced the brightest smile I could manage, and walked out of the break room. Back in the showroom, Eleanor had just finished her phone call and walked in. Seeing me, she warmly asked if I had found anything I liked. I feigned a sudden headache, saying I wanted to go home and rest, and would return another day to choose. Eleanor appeared genuinely concerned, gently escorting me to the car and telling the driver to drive slowly. Throughout the ride home, I had to steel myself against her nauseatingly fake kindness, trying to play the part of a sweet, tired daughter-in-law. That night, I lay awake. My familiar little room suddenly felt suffocating. The designer gifts, the expensive diamond ring on my vanity, now looked like cold handcuffs waiting to shackle my life. The next morning, using the excuse that I had to review scores for the Arts Academy's year-end performance, I turned off my phone and told my parents I was leaving for work early. But I didn't go to work. I took a rideshare to a private investigator's office tucked away in a small alley off a busy commercial street, which I had spent all night researching. Meeting the agency manager, Detective Lewis, I briefly explained my situation, providing Ethan's license plate number, a photo of us together, and the address of the mansion. I handed over all my meager savings as a retainer, requesting a swift and discreet investigation into the true background of Eleanor and her son. 3 days of waiting for the investigation results felt like 3 centuries. I still had to force myself to text Ethan back and forth, accepting the nourishing meals he brought to my doorstep. Each time I saw Ethan's calm smile, his seemingly affectionate eyes, my stomach churned with disgust. I shivered, realizing the terrifying depths of human deceit. Someone who could perfectly impersonate an educated gentleman, acting so flawlessly that not a single flaw was revealed. On the 4th day, I received a call from the detective agency. I rushed to our meeting point at a quiet coffee shop. Holding the stack of documents, the cold words on the pages crushed the last flickering hope within me that perhaps there had been a misunderstanding. The detailed and precise investigation results were merciless. Eleanor had, in fact, never left the country. She was a professional con artist with a criminal record for fraud and embezzlement in multiple states. Having been released from prison a few years prior, the opulent mansion was indeed an expensive short-term rental. The lavish clothing and designer items were either sophisticated fakes or borrowed goods. As for Ethan, my supposed fiancé who flaunted his British master's degree, he was actually a high school dropout. He was a lazy, dissolute gambler, a willing accomplice who coordinated seamlessly with his mother to swindle kind, naive, well-off families of their affections and money. There was no multi-million-dollar import-export company, no educational background. Everything was a flawless script they had meticulously devised to lure me to my doom. I buried my face in my hands, clutching my head. Tears of bitter resentment finally streamed down my face, hot and salty. Detective Lewis, a middle-aged man with a weathered look, saw my despair. He lit a cigarette, took a long drag, and slowly began to speak. He said that during their digging into Eleanor and Ethan's past, his team had inadvertently unearthed a crucial lead. Information about a previous victim, a young woman named Ava, who had fallen into the exact same trap 3 years ago. Through professional contacts, the detective had reached out to Ava and convinced her to meet me to provide additional evidence. The next afternoon, at a quiet cafe, I met Ava. She was a few years older than me, frail and pale, with eyes that constantly held a wary fear. Ava was working at a small restaurant owned by an acquaintance, struggling to make ends meet. When I mentioned Eleanor and Ethan, her entire body started to tremble. She quickly covered her face, stifling sobs as tears streamed through her fingers. It took a long time and much comforting before she composed herself enough to recount the darkest period of her life. Ava said she, too, had been a dreamy girl who believed in true love when she met Ethan. The scam was identical to the one they were now using on me. The same sweet words, the rented mansion, the luxury cars, and the extravagant gifts. Ava's wedding had been incredibly grand, envied by many. However, just 1 week after the honeymoon, the nightmare began. Once they had the marriage certificate and Ava had moved into the rented house, Eleanor and Ethan dropped their masks. They locked her in the room, confiscated her phone and all personal documents. They forced Ava to call her parents, fabricating a story about Ethan's family suffering business losses, desperately needing a large sum of money to save the company, or Ethan would go to jail. Ava's parents, out of love for their daughter and fear of her husband being branded a criminal, had heartbreakingly sold their ancestral land, sending millions of dollars to the in-laws. Once they had the money, Eleanor and Ethan revealed their true nature as bloodthirsty demons. Not only did they refuse to let her go, but they continued to psychologically torment Ava, insulting her with the vilest language imaginable. When Ava discovered the truth and tried to call the police, they cruelly beat her without mercy, locking her in a dark room for days. They starved her and threatened to throw acid on her if she dared to utter a word. Ava rolled up her sleeve, showing me faint scars still visible on her skin, evidence of those brutal beatings. Fortunately, during one instance, when they were distracted gambling, Ava managed to pick the window lock. She desperately climbed over the wall and escaped into the torrential rain that night. Fearing the ruthless revenge of the loan sharks protecting Eleanor and Ethan, she dared not return to her parents' home and dared not report to the police because she had no evidence. She chose to endure the bitter resentment, living a life of hiding and working odd jobs. Her days were filled with panic, waking up in cold sweats from nightmares every night. Hearing Ava's heartbreaking story, rage erupted within me. I firmly grasped her hand, feeling her trembling transmit to my own body. If it hadn't been for Mrs. Davis's life-saving intervention, in just a few more days, I would have stepped into this same horrific trap. My pity for Ava transformed into a powerful force. I couldn't just silently break off the engagement and retreat. If I let them go, they would continue to wreak havoc on other innocent girls. I looked directly into Ava's eyes, my voice now steel firm. I propose that Ava and I stand up together, expose the true faces of these wolves in sheep's clothing, and demand justice for ourselves and for the bitter tears she had shed. The room became strangely silent, but within the hearts of two small women, a fierce fire of retribution had been officially ignited. Leaving the coffee shop after the tearful encounter with Ava, I trudged heavily back to my familiar home, nestled in the quiet lanes of our peaceful suburban neighborhood. As dusk fell, the gentle chimes of the church bells rang softly, dispelling a part of the suffocating weight that enveloped my mind. Stepping through the time-worn rusted iron gate, the familiar scent of cooked food and the aroma of my mother's simmering pot roast wafted out, bringing tears to my eyes. My parents had lived honest lives, carefully saving every meager dollar from their pensions to ensure I received a good education. Why then, must trouble now loom over this peaceful home? I entered the house to find my father polishing his old classic car, while my mother was painstakingly washing salad greens in the kitchen. Seeing my pale face, my father quickly put down his cloth, rushing to support me. He tenderly asked if I was feeling unwell or if something stressful had happened at the music academy. My father's simple, heartfelt concern completely shattered the strong facade I had desperately maintained for days. I embraced him, sobbing uncontrollably, like a wronged child. My mother, hearing my cries, rushed up in alarm, her hands still damp with water, gently stroking my hair, asking repeatedly what was wrong. Once I had calmed down, I sat on the mat, laid out in the living room, took a deep breath, and began to recount the entire horrifying truth I had discovered. I started from Mrs. Davis's fateful question at the showroom, to the chilling investigation report from the private detective agency, and finally, Ava's blood and tears story. I detailed every aspect of Eleanor and Ethan's sinister plot, how they intended to use me as a pawn to extort my family's assets, leaving us homeless. Hearing the story, the house fell into an ominous silence. My mother buried her face in her hands, weeping convulsively. She cried for her naive daughter, who had nearly fallen into a den of wolves. My father sat silently, his calloused hands clenched, every line on his aging face revealing profound indignation. He understood that these people had not only deceived his daughter's affections but also trampled upon the dignity and livelihoods of his entire family. Yet, being a calm and principled man, my father did not yell or utter bitter curses. He poured a glass of warm water for my mother, then turned to look at me with resolute eyes. His voice was deep but carried immense weight. He said that in every misfortune, there is some luck. Our family had good karma, and thus, a benevolent force had led me to a good person who gave me a timely warning. He emphasized that we absolutely must not use violence or despicable means to seek revenge. For if we did, we would become just as evil as Eleanor and Ethan. The most important thing now was to expose their true faces, stop their dark scheme, and help the vulnerable, like Ava, to bring justice to light. The next morning, I brought Ava home to meet my parents. Seeing Ava's emaciated, shrunken figure, trembling with fear, my mother could not hold back her tears. She embraced Ava, patting her back, comforting her as if she were her own long-lost daughter. During lunch, my parents continuously placed food on Ava's plate, encouraging her to courageously face her past. The warmth of our family's affection softened the cold heart of that unfortunate young woman. Under our small roof, filled with human kindness, we together devised a plan. It was not an alliance for violent retaliation or bloody revenge, but a righteous confrontation, using sharp truth to tear apart the masks of these deceitful con artists, forcing them to bow their heads and admit their guilt before the law and their consciences. The plan was meticulously agreed upon. I tried to maintain the calmest demeanor possible, as I called Eleanor. On the other end of the line, her voice was still as sweet and eager as ever, constantly urging me to start moving my belongings to the mansion to get used to living there. I suppressed a wave of nausea, using an excited tone to announce, "This weekend, my parents will bring some very special guests to visit my future in-laws' home." I intentionally hinted that these were distant, incredibly wealthy relatives who had returned from overseas. Hearing I was about to marry, they wanted to see the groom's family's circumstances firsthand to prepare a wedding gift worth millions of dollars. As expected, Eleanor and Ethan's insatiable greed was immediately piqued. She was visibly delighted, laughing heartily, promising to host a spectacular tea party to welcome the delegation from my side. She had no idea that behind those honeyed words lay a sword of truth, waiting to strike. Sunday morning, a 7-seater taxi carrying my family and Ava rolled into the exclusive coastal community. The closer we got to the waterfront mansion, the tenser the atmosphere in the car became. Ava sat huddled in the back seat, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. She was about to confront the place that had imprisoned and tormented her physically and mentally for so long. My mother, seeing this, took Ava's hand, offering her warmth and steadfastness. My father sat in the front passenger seat, his face solemn and composed, like a judge on his way to deliver a verdict. The car stopped at the main gate, the ornate iron gates swinging wide. In the courtyard, Eleanor and Ethan were already waiting. Eleanor was resplendent in a luxurious velvet dress, a string of large, shimmering pearls around her neck, her hair elegantly coiffed. Ethan wore a sharp gray suit, holding a large bouquet of red roses, a bright, innocent smile on his lips. The surrounding area was sumptuously decorated with fresh flowers and a red carpet. On stone tables in the garden, trays of expensive pastries and gilded tea sets sparkled. They had invested a considerable sum in today's charade, hoping to reel in an even bigger catch. I was the first to step out of the car. Ethan immediately approached, reaching to embrace my waist as was his habit. I coldly took a step back, avoiding his repulsive touch. The smile on Ethan's lips stiffened slightly. He awkwardly asked me, "Why are you keeping your distance today?" I didn't answer, only motioned towards the opened car door. My parents stepped out, their demeanor composed and dignified. Immediately after, From the last row, Ava slowly emerged. She wore a simple dress. Her hair neatly tied back, her face pale, but her eyes no longer showed evasion. She held her head high, looking directly at Eleanor and Ethan. The moment Eleanor saw Ava's face, the fake smile on her lips froze. The trace of blood color on her meticulously made-up face vanished instantly, replaced by a lifeless pallor. The bouquet of roses in Ethan's hand dropped to the ground, its red petals scattering across the gray flagstones. The glamorous, artificial atmosphere of the luxurious mansion suddenly shattered, replaced by a deathly silence, so stifling that one could almost hear the rapid breaths of the fraudsters as they realized their charade had reached its end. Ava's appearance was like a bucket of ice water splashed in Eleanor and Ethan's faces, stripping away every layer of their carefully constructed perfect masks. The garden fell silent, so quiet I could hear the wind rustling through the trees. My father stepped forward, positioning himself between me and the fraudsters. In a steely, resonant voice, completely unwavering, he began to speak. He stated each word clearly, frankly declaring that our family had not come here today to receive wedding gifts or to discuss family matters. We had come to return everything false that Eleanor and her son had used to trap his daughter. I stepped forward, placing the velvet box containing the expensive diamond ring and the designer handbag on the marble table. Those luxurious items now lay exposed, revealing the true nature of a borrowed, fabricated scheme designed to deceive honest people. Eleanor retreated a few steps, her eyes darting around, searching for a way to protest. She stammered, trying to salvage the situation with pathetic lies. She loudly accused my family of slander, daring to defame honest business people. Ethan echoed his mother, playing the victim, swearing that his affection for me was genuine, and that Ava was merely a mentally unstable ex-girlfriend trying to sabotage our happiness. Their manipulative words, twisting black into white, only deepened the disgust within me. At that very moment, Ava stepped forward. She was no longer the weak, fearful girl, cowering in fear. Ava stood tall, her voice ringing out clearly and powerfully. She pointed directly at Eleanor, recounting in vivid detail how she had been tricked into marrying Ethan, and how her parents' assets had been extorted. She spoke of the days she was locked in a dark room, starved, and subjected to physical and emotional abuse. She exposed Ethan's true identity, an unemployed, indebted gambler, who had posed as a master's student from abroad to swindle women. Ava's damning accusations were like sledgehammer blows to the weak defense of the scamming mother and son. Eleanor clutched her head, her legs trembling, and she collapsed to the ground. There were no physical assaults or vulgar curses from my family. We chose to use the light of truth to expose their filthy darkness. The power of truth itself, my father's integrity, and Ava's courage created an invisible pressure that completely crushed their will to resist. Seeing the once privileged mother and son now pathetic and crumpled on the ground, I felt no satisfying vengeance. I only felt a pang of sorrow for souls who, due to insatiable greed, had lost their humanity, pushing themselves onto a path of no return. My father's voice rang out, delivering his final words. He declared the annulment of all marriage agreements, severing all ties. He simultaneously warned them to abandon their path of sin, or else the law and the principles of karma would never spare them. My father's straightforwardness, compassion, yet utmost severity affirmed the stand of honest people, who never bow to evil but also refuse to let evil turn them into cold-hearted individuals. Just as my father finished speaking and was about to turn to lead our family away, the screech of tires echoed sharply right outside the mansion gate. The iron gates were violently burst open by a group of burly, tattooed men. They carried baseball bats and iron pipes, their faces grim and menacing, storming directly into the courtyard. These were the loan sharks, Eleanor and Ethan's actual creditors. The very people who had lent Eleanor millions of dollars to finance this elaborate scam. They had caught wind of the unfolding situation and decided to collect their debts. The leader pointed a bat at Eleanor, threatening to break her limbs and seize the house if she didn't provide enough money, principal, and interest, that day. Ethan was utterly terrified, clinging to his mother. Both mother and son cowered, crying and pleading hysterically. The scene was now chaotic and dangerous. The thugs blocked all exits, their menacing eyes gleaming as they advanced towards everyone. In that critical moment, instead of abandoning the fraudsters to the thugs' brutal justice for personal satisfaction, my father stepped forward, shielding our family, while loudly ordering the hooligans to stop their unlawful actions. At the same time, the wail of police sirens resonated from a distance, growing steadily louder. Sensing trouble, the gang panicked, trying to flee, but it was too late. Law enforcement officers swarmed in, quickly apprehending the entire group of hired enforcers along with their weapons. Before arriving at the mansion, I had anticipated the complexity of this scam network. To ensure my family's safety and avoid regrettable consequences, I had proactively taken all the evidence provided by the private investigator, along with Ava's official complaint, to the police department. The timely appearance of law enforcement not only prevented a bloody brawl but also officially cast the final net, trapping this sophisticated fraud organization. As the police officers approached to read Eleanor and Ethan their rights for fraud and embezzlement, Eleanor looked up with tear-filled eyes towards my family. In that moment of facing legal judgment, standing between life and death which had just been averted, her cruel, avaricious facade seemed to crumble. She realized that these ordinary, honest people whom she had sought to deceive and exploit were the very ones who had indirectly saved her life from the knives of the bloodthirsty thugs. Eleanor stumbled forward, bowing deeply to my parents and Ava. Late tears of regret streamed down the wrinkled face of the woman she truly was, a woman who had spent her entire life deceiving. She uttered apologies through choked sobs, admitting all her crimes and begging for forgiveness from her victims. Ethan also hung his head, not daring to look at anyone, meekly following the police escort. Watching the two figures disappear into the police car, I breathed a sigh of relief. There was no violence, no bloody revenge. They had bowed their heads and admitted their crimes before the law. And more importantly, they had learned a bitter lesson about karma. The greatest punishment sometimes isn't physical pain, but the awakening of conscience when confronted with the compassion of good people. The storm passed, leaving a quiet and peaceful space for my family. I officially called a few close relatives to announce the cancellation of the wedding, citing a gentle reason that we were not compatible and had differing life views, so that everything would pass smoothly. My parents agreed with this approach, as they did not want to turn family misfortune into gossip. The essential thing was that their daughter was safe and sound. A few days after everything had settled, my entire family decided to buy a beautiful fruit basket and select a box of premium coffee to take to the furniture showroom. To thank the woman who, in a way, gave me a second chance at life. Upon entering the store, Mrs. Davis recognized me immediately. Seeing me with my parents, looking rosy-cheeked and cheerful, a radiant smile bloomed on her face. Mrs. Davis invited my entire family into the familiar staff break room. My parents grasped her hands, tears glistening in their eyes, offering their most sincere gratitude. My father said that without her kindness and courage to speak the truth that day, our family would probably be drowning in tears right now, our home shattered. Mrs. Davis smiled gently, waving her hand, saying that it was something any person with a conscience would do. She shared that in life, if you see someone about to fall into an abyss and you can pull them back, you must consider it building good karma for your children and grandchildren. Her simple, heartfelt words of human kindness deeply moved my entire family. Even in the bustling, chaotic metropolis of Los Angeles, such golden hearts still exist. People willing to extend a hand to protect the vulnerable, even if they are not bound by blood. As for Ava, after shedding the burden of her past and personally witnessing her tormentors pay for their crimes behind bars, her spirit had recovered significantly. My family adopted her. And my father, leveraging some old connections, found her a light accounting job at a small factory near our home. Ava now enjoyed warm family meals. A smile had begun to bloom on the face of the girl who had endured so much pain. My life gradually returned to its normal rhythm. In the afternoons, I would sit at the grand piano, pouring my soul into soothing melodies, guiding students who loved art. Looking at the intertwined black and white keys, I realized a profound lesson about life. Happiness is never measured by luxurious designer items, glittering diamonds, or grand mansions borrowed and used for show. True happiness lies in peace of mind. In a small home where parents are always waiting, and in an honest, righteous way of living. The nightmare closed. I found myself more mature, more understanding, and more appreciative of every simple moment of my present life. The storm clouds had dispersed, returning to our quiet neighborhood a brilliant and utterly clear golden afternoon sun. Dear cherished audience, as Chloe's tumultuous story concludes, perhaps within each of us lingers a moment for deep reflection on the deceptive allure of fleeting glamour in this world. A kind girl almost paid with her youth and her family's peace, simply because she blindly believed in dazzling, false promises. Through that arduous ordeal, we truly grasped that no matter how glossy and splendid external material possessions may appear, they can never conceal a person's true nature. Insatiable greed and deceit will always push people into dead ends of despair. Meanwhile, courage, kindness, and daring to stand up for the vulnerable are the brightest lights that redeem unfortunate lives. This story also serves as a profound reminder of how we interact with one another. Sometimes, just an honest word, a timely warning from a stranger, carries the power to change an entire destiny. Don't let illusions of silk and luxury blind your clarity. And don't let the glamour of money diminish the core values of family and integrity. True happiness is never measured by cold diamonds or grand houses built on borrowed claims, but always blossoms from inner peace and genuine, righteous love. We wish you all good health, happiness, and prosperity, and may you always keep a warm, forgiving heart, yet possess enough reason to discern what truly is the rightful haven of your life. Thank you sincerely, dear audience, for taking the precious time to listen to today's complete story.